وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم 2 فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون. قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم ولا يمسنكم منا عذاب أليم. قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون. وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون. أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغن عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون. إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين. إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون. قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين. وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Apologize, I had underestimated the amount of time we gave for prayers, and inshallah we're trying to get you all food, and it's been a long program already. So moving to the lecture inshallah for Hadhrat Muslim. Please invite the Sheikh to the member with 3 loud salawats.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم به نستعين. الحمد لله الذي جعل الحمد مفتاحا لذكره وسببا للمزيد من فضله ودليلا على آلائه وعظمته. ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولله عزة ولرسوله وللمؤمنين ولكن المنافقين لا يعلمون. صدق الله علي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. جميع المؤمنين والمؤمنات. First and foremost, I give my condolences to the Imam of our time, Imam Zaman Ajal Faraj al-Sharif, for the martyrdom of Muslim ibn Aqil, and then my condolences to all of you as well. Muslim ibn Aqil, as we know, he is the first shaheed in the way of Imam Hussein alayhi afdalu salatu wassalam. The first shaheed on that path, which Imam Hussein, if you want to sum up his mission and what he actually represents or even gives to the believers, is in that statement, hayhat minna dhilla, that far be away from us humility, to be, be lowered, our status be lowered. The opposite of dhilla is izzah. And that is one of the points we mentioned also a few nights ago when we commemorated the martyrdom of Imam Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam. That the believer has izzah. And of course that izzah comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the munafiqeen, or those who do not walk the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the path of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, they may have some idea of what izzah is, or at least they construct this idea of izzah, but it is not true dignity, al-izzah. So what is that true dignity and izzah? Inshallah, very briefly, we will speak about that. So one of the beautiful encounters that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that he had with Jibreel alayhi salam, he asks Jibreel, he says, "Idni," or "Idni." So he says, give him advice. And of course, this advice that Jibreel he gives him, of course, is for us. So Jibreel gives him 3 advices, and 3, or at least 2 results that should come out of that advice. If you truly reflect upon that advice that Jibreel he gives to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he tells the Prophet of Allah, he says, Ya Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, Ish kama sha't, or Ish ma sha'ta fa innaka mayyitun. Ahbib ma sha'ta fa innaka mufariqu. And the third thing, i'mal ma sha'ta fa innaka mulaqi. So he tells the Prophet, he says, live however you want to live. Of course, as I said, this advice is for the believers, is for us, because we know the lifestyle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The lifestyle of Rasulullah is uswa for us. It is the example for us to live by. So Jibreel, he gives us advice. He says, live however you want to live. Following the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or not following the path of Allah. In other words, you have that choice. So live however you live. But know that that life will come to an end. فَإِنَّكَ مَيِّتٌ. Also, love however or whomever you want. فَإِنَّكَ مُفَارِقُ. That what will happen, again, you will eventually part from that person. And you will part from that person because you will leave for this dunya, and they may be left behind, or they may leave from this dunya, and you're left behind. Then, of course, again, without going into much of the commentary, and we've mentioned this over and over again, that the believers, that they're together in this world and also in the akhirah. But Jibreel tells him, he says, live however you want, love however you want, and the end result is, as he said, وَأْمَلْ مَا شَئْتَ. And also, do whatever you want. Practice whatever you want, and know فَإِنَّكَ مُلَاقِي. That amal, that action which you've done, that you will encounter that action. In other words, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, that action will be placed before you. So in summary, as we say, live, love, and act, which is kind of opposite of what they say in the West. They say, live, love, and play. We'll get to that. What is that live, love, and play versus this live, love, and act? If we live, love, and act as Jibreel, he's advising Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and if it is done in the right way, because that's the objective, to have these things in the right way, then there will be 2 results. sharaf, honor, wal-izzah. So if we live as we are supposed to be living by that example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and of course that example of the Rasulullah and his Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdal salatu wasalam is the embodiment of the Quran. Is that embodiment of the Quran? And of course, and if you live that way, like Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam Hussein alayhi afdal salatu wasalam, as he said, Hiya hatim al-nadhillah. Hiya hatim al-nadhillah. So sharaf, honor, is one of those things that will come about. He says, وَالشَّرَفُ الْمُؤْمِنِ صَلَاتُهُ بِاللَّيْلِ. So this is one of the results. And of course, that Salatul Layl, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us in the Quran to make that Salatul Layl. The other result is izzatu, that the izzah of the believer, and what will be that? What will it be? وَإِزَّتُهُ كَفُّهُ عَنْ أَعْرَاضِ النَّاسِ. And so the izzat of the mu'min is that he does what? He doesn't humiliate other individuals. He does not belittle other individuals. So if you live in this way, if you create relationships in that way, the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us in the Quran, and also we act based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in the Quran, then we will gain these two qualities of being sharif and being aziz, which is different from, again, that statement that they make in the West. They say, oh, live, love, and play. Doesn't, it's not all bad. So what they mean, or at least that philosophy of life, is that one should live and appreciate the present and seek purpose in life. This is some of the interpretation of that, live, love, and play. Love is to foster meaningful relationships, which is also good. It's also good. And play means to be creative and to be to enjoy leisure time. It matches a bit with that advice of Jibreel that ish ma shi't. So in that living, without going again into much detail because we don't have much time, is that as the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdal salatu wasalam, they've told us to divide our time, our life, into 4 segments: to worship, to work, to spend time with friends and family, and also to do things which are halal, to take enjoyment in that which is halal. That live, love, and play doesn't have these parameters. Doesn't have those parameters. But that advice from Jibreel, it has those parameters. So inshallah, that if we lived by that code, or at least that advice of Jibreel alayhi salam, then we will be among those individuals who have honor, who have izzah. And that dignity, that izzah, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states, is for whom? For Allah. Its origin and its root goes back to Allah. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks, He says in Surah Munafiqun, وَلِلَّهِ إِزَّةُ وَلِرَسُولِهِ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So izzah is for Allah, His Prophet, and the believers. And this is opposite of what the munafiqeen, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَلَكِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. They have no idea, they have no clue. But they have this idea or concept of a false izzah, or false dignity. And what is that in? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives us that in a very beautiful verse. He says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ, in Surah Baqarah, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ اتَّقُوا اللَّهِ أَخَذَتْهُ الْعِزَّةُ بِالْإِثْمِ. Subhanallah. That when the munafiq, when folks are told to be God conscious, to be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how you live, and that ma'isha and your relationships, also in your actions, what did I do? أَخَذَتْهُ الْعِزَّةُ بِالْإِثْمِ. Then they become proud. They think that their izzah, their dignity is in what? And not in these things, not in being humble, not in following what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered, not in living by the code of life of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhim afdal salatu wasalam. Why? Because they've placed their concept of dignity and izzah in other things, in wealth, in status, in maqam, in these things which are superficial. One beautiful example from history, It's a very interesting example. Again, if you read the books of history of Tabari or any of the other scholars who've written history, Harun al-Abbasi, one of the Khulafa. So if you read his time, one of the groups of individuals, one qawm, one qabila, the Baramaki, the Baramakis. So he was very close to them. So anyone from this family, from this qawm of Baramaka, that he brought them into his dawla, into his close ranks as very good friends, some of them also of being wazirs, his advisors, ministers. So he held them in a very high status. Until one point, this roughly about 17 years that he held them, and again, they're the ones who actually held him in power, Harun al-Abbasi. But at one point, one of them, or a few of them, did something that angered Harun. So what did he do? He punished all of them, all of the Brahmikas. So he began to repel them and take them out of his government, not even have among them individuals who would advise him. Among those individuals who were from the Baramaka was one of them by the name of Ja'far al-Baramaki. And he was known as one of the close advisors of Harun. That even he was repelled. So one of the individuals at that time, Muhammad ibn Abdurrahman Hashimi, that he said one day he went home, and this was on the day of Eid, so Eid al-Adha, much like tomorrow. So he said that he visited his mother. And when he visited his mother, he saw his mother speaking to an elderly lady, and she was wearing very, poor clothes. You can see that she's faqir. She's not someone with wealth. And then he asks his mother. He says that, "Oh, my mother, who is this lady?" He says, "Oh, you don't know who this is?" He says, "No, who is she?" She said that this is Ubadah. Ubadah was the mother of Ja'far al-Baramaki. And so he was shocked. He was like, "Wow, that she's dressed like this, and she's here, and she's coming." And so he spoke to her. He said that, what happened? I know that you were repelled from Harun al-Abbasi, but in this state you've come? And so he just simply asked her, he says that, "Tell me, you've perhaps seen a lot of things. What is the most, you could say, unusual thing that you can tell me from your experience?" So Ubadah, the mother of Ja'far al-Baramaki, he says that the most unusual thing is that last year during Eid, during this time, I had 400 maidservants, all in my service. That whatever I commanded them to do, they would do. They would do. And even at that time, she said, I thought my son, Ja'far al-Baramaki, that he didn't really observe my rights. That why I only had 400 maidservants. That I wanted more. I should have had more who were in my service. So the most unusual thing in my experience is that last year that was my state. But this year, this is my state. That I've come and I'm in need of 2 sheepskin. There's one to put on the floor of the place that I live, and the other to cover myself. So in the matter of 1 year that her state goes from having this, what most people would look at, they were like, "Oh, this is, someone has izzah, they have dignity, they have respect." Why? Because of the wealth and the status. But that is not what al-izzah is in. It's not in that. She said, but now I'm in this state. That izzah, as we mentioned, that dignity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala holds, that even if an individual, as we look at some of the mu'mineen, we say, "Oh, well, most of the mu'mineen are mustada'af." In one of the du'as, or at least one of the ziyarats of Imam Zaman, Ajr Faraj al-Sharif, we give salutations to Imam Zaman, "Assalamu alayka ya mu'izz al-mu'mineen al-mustada'afeen." So even if apparently you don't have that wealth or that status, the believers are what? They have izzah. They have dignity. And that dignity comes through living the life of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhi wa Just to end, at least this part, that Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi hafizahullah, two very beautiful ahadith in this way, in this regard. That our izzah and our dignity as believers comes from two things: our action and also, of course, our acceptance of what is truth, our understanding and holding fast to what is true. So Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi hafizahullah, he advised one of his companions, he says, إِنَّ الْوُصُولِ إِلَى اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ سَفَرٌ لَا يُدْرَكُ إِلَّا بِإِمْتِطَاءِ اللَّيْلِ. Subhanallah. He says that to reach to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reaching to Allah, he says, it's a journey. But that journey can only be achieved through what? Imtita' al-layl. So imtita' means something that's markoob, so that you have because whenever you go on a journey, you need something to ride on, correct? So what does Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi hafizahullah, he says that you ride upon the night. Imtita' al-layl. Some of the ulama, they've given commentary of this, meaning what? That's Salatul Layl. Or even, at the very least, that if we're not making the Salatul Layl, that one wakes up before the Salatul Fajr, and even 2 minutes, 3 minutes, to make dua. 2 or 3 minutes to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is how we reach to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we gain that izzah as well. Then Imam Sadiq alayhi hafizahullah, his second advice, he says, مَا تَرَكَ الْحَقِّ عَزِيزٌ إِلَّا ذَلَّ وَلَا أَخَذَ بِهِ ذَلِيلٌ إِلَّا عَزَّ. Subhanallah. He says that someone who has izzah, again, izzah by that standard that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stated, by that standard that is set by Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhim afsalatu wasalam. He says that a person, if they had izzah, in other words, they had haqq, they were on the path of truth, the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they left it. مَا تَرَكَ الْحَقِّ عَزِيزٌ إِلَّا ذَلَّ. Then that person will lower their status. They will become dhaleel. وَلَا أَخَذَ بِهِ. So, and whoever holds fast to that haqq, even if before their status was low, even if before they were lost, even if before they had no faith, but they held fast to that haqq, that truth, then what happens? Azza. Then their status and their maqam goes higher. And one beautiful example of that, of course, tonight is the night that we mourn for Musab ibn Aqil, but one beautiful example of that is Hur. Hur. That he was not on the path of Imam Hussein. وَأَخَذَ بِهِ. And then he held fast to the maqam of Imam Hussein. And then what happened? Azza. The status of Hur, it was exalted. So all of the shuhada who stood with Imam Hussein, and even Muslim ibn Aqil, who was martyred in the way of Imam Hussein, the Safir of Imam Hussein, to go and to respond, or at least to find out whether those individuals were truthful when they called for Imam Hussein. They said that they will stand for truth. And that's a prime example of what? Those individuals that tarak al-haq, they were aziz. And how do we know that they were aziz? Because Imam Hussein alayhi hafizahullah, that when they said that they were committed to truth, they said that they were committed to haqq, what was right, Imam Hussein sent Muslim ibn Aqil, who was, biologically he's the cousin of Muslim ibn Aqil, but as he sent him, when he wrote that letter, he says, I'm sending to you Akhi, my brother. On one hand, yes, he grew up in the house with Imam Hussein alayhi hafizahullah. But Muslim ibn Aqil, he was aziz to Imam Hussein. He was beloved to Imam Hussein. So if individuals, if they appear to be aziz, then yes, you will send who to him? Send to him whom? Someone who you love as well. But tarakul haqq. But they left that truth, and what happened? Dhalla, that their status, it became lowered. The izzat, the dignity of Mus'ab ibn Aqil, if we truly want to understand that izzah of Mus'ab ibn Aqil, then we see that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam actually mourned for Mus'ab ibn Aqil before his shahada. Mourned for Mus'ab ibn Aqil before his shahada. Actually, there are quite a few parallels between Mus'ab ibn Aqil and, again, the Ahlul Bayt. One of them is even tonight. Tonight is what? Night of dua. Night of dua. And he was shaheed in this night. The Laylatul Qadr was also a night of dua. That Mus'ab ibn Aqil, his master, his mawla, his also the one who raised him, because Mus'ab ibn Aqil was raised in the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He was also shaheed on what? The night of Qadr. This shows that even Mus'ab ibn Aqil, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is aziz. Allah has given him the status that on such a night, that as we find also in the riwayat of Ahlul Bayt, they said that if you missed the barakah of Laylatul Qadr, where's the place to make that up at? Yawm al-Araf, day of Araf. So Mus'ab ibn Aqil, he was martyred in such a night. Mus'ab ibn Aqil, as I said, that he was mourned before his shahada. Who else was born before their shahada? Imam Hussein alayhi salatu. The Ahlul Bayt, Rasulullah, Fatima Zahra, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Hassan, that before even the shahadat of Imam Hussein, they would weep and they would cry for Imam Hussein. And we find the same with Mus'ab ibn Aqil. In one encounter with the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Imam Ali alayhi salatu, he asked him, he says, Ya Rasulallah, innaka tuhibbu aqila. He says, Oh Rasulullah, I see that you have a love and affection towards Aqil, the brother of Imam Ali. I was wondering that why does he love Aqil so much? And Rasulullah, he responded, he says, Ay wallah, inni la uhibbuhu hubbain, hubban lahu, wa hubban li hubbi Abi Talib. He says, I love Aqil for two reasons. One, because Abu Talib loves Aqil. Says the second reason why I love Aqil is for him himself. Why? وَإِنَّ لَهُ وَلَدٌ وَإِنَّ وَلَدَهُ لَمَقْتُولٌ فِي مَحَبَّةِ وَلَدِكَ. He says, Ya Ali, oh my brother, that why do I love Aqil? Because the son of Aqil, he will be martyred in the way and for the love of your son, O Ali, for the love of Hussein. فتدمع عليه عيون المؤمنين وتصلى عليه الملائكة المقربين. That what will happen, what will the son of Aqil be like? Muslim, he will be the one that the tears will flow from the eyes of the believers for the sake of Mus'ab ibn Aqil. The angels, that they will pray over the body of Mus'ab ibn Aqil. And then what happened to Rasulullah as Amir al-Mu'mineen? He says, as Rasulullah, he said this, ثُمَّ بَكَى رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ. He says, the Prophet, he began to cry. حَتَّى جَرَتْ دُمُوعُهُ عَلَى صَدْرِهِ. He said the tears of Rasulullah was so much that the chest of Rasulullah became moist and wet from the tears of Rasulullah, that he is mourning the martyrdom of Muslim ibn Aqil. And then the Prophet of Allah, he says, إِلَى اللَّهِ أَشْكُو مَا تَلْقَى عِتْرَتِي مِنْ بَعْدِي. So Muslim ibn Aqil is among the household of Rasulullah. This is the dignity that Rasulullah gives to Muslim ibn Aqil. He says, I complain to Allah about what will happen to my Ahlul Bayt, what will happen to my family after me. And what was that martyrdom of Muslim ibn Aqil? That he was left all alone in Kufa. They said that on that night when he went to the masjid, they said that there were people behind him. But as he turned around to see that were the people still coming, at one point there were thousands of people. As he got closer to the masjid, they said there were only 10 people. But as he entered into the masjid, he was left all alone to make the salat. They said Muslim, he was going from place to place. He came from the masjid, wondering that where should I go? وَقَفْ Muslim يَمَّلْ تَوْبَةً. So he found one place where he sat for a minute. This was the house of Taw'a. She gave him water. She gave him refuge for that night. And in the morning he came out to fight all alone on the plains of Karbala, on the plain in the Kufa, just as Imam Hussein had stood all alone in the plains of Karbala. This is another parallel between Muslim ibn Aqil and his master Sayyid al-Shuhada, that he was all alone, that no one was there to fight with him, no one was there to help him. But then there was a place that we see, and what happened to Muslim ibn Aqil, that was like no other shaheed. They said that when his head was severed, his body was thrown from the top of the castle. But this was not enough for those enemies of Allah. This is what the Maqta says. وَهَذَا أَوَّلُ قَتِيلٍ صُلِبَتْ جُثَّتُهُ مِنْ بَنِي هَاشِمٍ. They said this was the first qatil that was hung. They hung the body of Muslim ibn Aqil from the bridge in Kufa. وَأَوَّلُ رَأْسٍ حُمِلَ مِنْ رُؤُوسِهِمْ إِلَى دَمِشْقٍ. And his head was the first head. It preceded all of the heads of the shuhada to Sham, that place that Imam Zayn al-Abidin said was the most difficult of places. Asham, Asham, Asham. إِنَّ لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيُّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. اللهم بحق هذا المجلس لمسلم ابن أقيل اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا وقضي حواجنا واشفي مرضانا وارحم أمواتنا وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان واجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشرين بين يديه وتحت لواء بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين. Short ziyarah. السلام عليك يا نبي الله، السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا حبيب الله ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليك يا بضعة رسول الله، السلام عليك يا فاطمة زهراء سيدة نساء العالمين وقرة عين الرسول ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليكم أيها الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة أجمعين ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليكم مني سلام الله جميعا ما بقيت الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. Everyone, السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليك يا سفير الحسين يا مسلم بن عقيل بن أبي طالب ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم أئمة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين. السلام على علي بن الحسين وعلى محمد بن علي وعلى جعفر بن محمد وعلى موسى بن جعفر وعلى علي بن موسى وعلى محمد بن علي وعلى محمد بن علي وعلى علي بن محمد وعلى حسن بن علي. السلام على حجة بن الحسن القائم المنتظر المهدي. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك. السلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.